Hi, I'm Beck and welcome to some recommendations for cozy fantasy books. I want to kick it off with The Phoenix Keeper, which I also have a separate review for that's spoiler free. So anything that's relevant to each of these books, I'm going to link in the description so you can access them later if you choose to. But The Phoenix Keeper follows Ayla, and she is the lead Phoenix Keeper at a world-renowned magical zoo. Her strength is in animal conservation and her one drive is to save these phoenixes from extinction, but she's not taken as seriously as she would like to be. In order to convince people that phoenixes are worth coming to see and worth people's time, she needs to face one of her major fears and anxieties. Coincidentally, facing these fears and anxieties will also get her funding for the phoenix keeping duties. So she needs to embrace what the Griffin Keeper is currently doing, and that is putting on shows to an audience. But Ayla gets panic attacks and freezes in front of crowds, whereas Luciana, who is the Griffin Keeper, it seems like second nature to her. And so Ayla and Luciana are almost rivals, and Ayla thinks she's perfect and can do no wrong. And you can see where this is going because it's a female-female romance. Essentially, the future of the phoenix species rests on Ayla's shoulders, but she just has to remember that she is not alone. And this one had such strong animal conservation themes because obviously where it's set and Ayla's drive and focus of the book, I like that the romance too was a subplot of the story and not the overarching driving force. Ayla's passion and her anxiety were very neatly handled and described, as well as having the romance subplot. So I found that balanced really well. As I was reading this, I was enjoying myself, and towards the middle and end of the book, I found that my emotional investment in the story was somehow peaked. Like, I suddenly had emotional stakes and value in this story, and it made me tear up a couple of times when I was listening to it, and it was just beautiful. It really grew on me, and it's such a cozy female-female romance with such a strong core, and that's why I wanted to put it first and foremost in this video, because it's one of the cozy fantasies that I've loved so much and I want more people to read. Then we've got The House Witch, and this one follows Finley Ash Owen, and he is a witch, but people aren't really revered as being a witch in these lands. They're more shunned if they're a witch. So Finley is trying to hide that. So he's hiding his secret identity as a witch, and he's joining the king and queen's court to be their royal cook. And while he's keen on keeping his head down, that doesn't really last for long when he's building this community around him and around his kitchen and around food and that cozy comfort that comes with food and that trust as well. And so people start realizing that he is in fact a witch and the secret is out. As he gets more and more sequestered in court, he ends up going almost toe-to-toe with some knights based on some moral grounding that he's not willing to give up on. He also ends up helping the queen with her pregnancy. Not to mention that he butts heads with the royal mage in the castle. So mages are more renowned than witches. I don't know why there is such a distinction, but it is very significant in this book that mages are fine and witches are not, and so naturally they butt heads as well. There are also other elements to this story, including a spy, a very quiet subplot of a romance that is not really the focus of the book. It comes in a little bit, but I wouldn't read this book for a romance. I would read it more for the cozy element, and by cozy element I mean when Finley starts connecting to people, when he gets his animal familiar who is a cat named Kraken, and he starts to build this cozy, trusting environment where his magic flourishes and thrives because he's a house witch. So the more comfortable and the more at home he feels, the more powerful he is and the more he can give to other people. And I liked that tone of the whole story. But that said, it's not my favorite cozy fantasy. It was enjoyable to read. I just wish I was a little bit more emotionally invested. But this has pretty decent ratings on Goodreads, so I might just be a little bit of an outlier in terms of that emotional investment. And a lot of the time there was banter just kind of under the surface at some points as well. There was a humor to it and I just really enjoyed that. So it's a great time, it's a quick read, and that's why I wanted to recommend it as well. Then we've got the cozy fantasy that probably started the whole trend, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. And this one follows Viv, who is an orc, and she's tired of battle. She wants to go somewhere new and start fresh. And for her, starting fresh means opening a coffee shop in the city of Thune where nobody has heard of what coffee is before. So she's got some hurdles in front of her. Those hurdles include old and new rivals, but in looking to source different aspects of building her cafe from literally nothing into what it becomes, she ends up again nurturing relationships that are close and special to her, and they really become her support network, which is really beautiful. Even when looking at this book, I can almost taste the cinnamon scrolls that are described in here. They are just so delicious in my mind. So it definitely left an impression on me, but it also took me about 50 pages at least to get into it. at first. So it took off after those pages for me, but it took a little bit of a slow burn to get into it. So if you are worried that you're not getting into it and it's been a couple of pages, give it a chance because it does take off after that. It also does include a female-female romance, but again, I would not say that it is the driving force of the story. The driving force is Viv as the protagonist and her character development and her new beginnings and meeting all of these new characters and kind of bringing them into the fold. So I would read it for those reasons and then just have the female-female romance on the side as like a, oh cool, that's happening, I like that. And then after Legends and Lattes was published, this one came out, and that is Bookshops and Bone Dust. So in publication order, it's technically a sequel, even though this is set before Viv opened the coffee shop at all. So it is confusingly both a prequel and a sequel, but I would recommend reading them in publication order because the end of this book might spoil Legends and Lattes for you. So treat it technically as a sequel, although in time in the world, it's a prequel. Confusing? Not at all. This follows Viv again, but in this one she's 18 years old and her crew at the time are hunting down this renowned necromancer and trying to take this necromancer out. But during battle, Viv is wounded, she gets a leg injury and she's sent away to this small town to recover. She's forced to recuperate in this little sleepy town called Merk, and she's doing so at much frustration because she just wants to be out on the battlefield with her friends supporting this campaign against the necromancer, but she can't do that. So she ends up making friends instead with this old bookshop owner. The bookstore is very run down in this town and Viv takes it upon herself to help bring it back to life again. To list off a couple of things in this book, there is a suspicious traveller, a gnome that has a chip on their shoulder, there's skeletons and a summer fling. And the romance in this, again, not the forefront, but I also liked how, because Viv was so young, she was still able to describe how she was feeling. And so you got a sense of the relationship and how she treated everyone. And it was just nice to see that even though we saw her older in Legends and Lattes, there was already an essence of that character in here to start with. So it was interesting to see what she'd become versus who she was. And unlike the first book, Legends and Lattes, I was actually hooked on this from page 1 because it drops you immediately into a battle. You already knew Viv because it's technically the sequel. So it made me already have stakes in the story. Like I wanted to know what was happening. So in that sense, it was good that I didn't need like a warm up to the story, but at the same time, this book kind of lost me around the middle of the book. It felt like the pace was dragging on a little bit. So it had solid characters. It just felt a little bit meandering at certain points. And I would say that I like Legends and Lattes much more than this one, but I still enjoyed both of them, although I found the connection to this wasn't quite as strong. Then yet again, we have another female-female romance, cozy fantasy. And it seems like there are a lot of cozy fantasies with female-female romance. I'm not complaining, I'm just noticing the pattern now. And that is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. And this follows Raina and Kianth. All they want to do is open a store that sells tea, but unfortunately, Raina is part of the Queen's private guard and Kianth is the most powerful sorceress in the land. So it's a little bit hard for them to run away from their responsibilities. But then after surviving an assassination attempt, both of them manage to escape and lo and behold, open this cozy tea shop. And they settle in a sleepy little town called Tawny that also has a bit of a dragon problem. This was really sweet and readable, and Kianth and Raina have spent a couple of years courting each other and catching up in days at a time, but they've never actually lived together. So this very much explored their interpersonal relationship of settling in and understanding how each other live. And I like how it showed hurt, but also discussion and communication in those quieter moments too. It felt like they were making their relationship real, and that felt like the focus of this one. This book would probably be on par emotion and feelings wise for me with The House Witch and also Bookshops and Bone Dust. I enjoyed it and it was readable, and I think people should give it a try, but it wasn't one of my favorite standout cozy fantasies, if that makes sense. That one is coming up, I'll talk about it later, only because at certain points it felt a little bit too meandering without a particular direction, and there were some side characters that I wish took the focus of the story, but clearly they were just meant to be side characters and that's okay. But sometimes, you know, characters are introduced and you're like, can we follow those guys over there because I want to know more? And that's what happened in this book. Not that Raina and Kianth weren't interesting, but I also wanted to know an extra story about the side characters. Whether that happens or not, not, I've got no idea, but I enjoyed it and I'd probably give it about a 3 stars. Same with The House Witch and Bookshops and Bone Dust. All of them are roughly 3 stars. Legends and Lattes and The Phoenix Keeper were both 4 stars. Then we've got The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and this was doing the rounds for a while, and it follows Mika Moon, and she's a witch, but she knows that she's not supposed to interact with other witches. She has to stay away and keep her head down because if her magic mingles with other witches, it will draw unwanted attention. So what has she done to compensate for not being able to actually tell people she's a real witch? She's created a social media channel where she pretends to be a witch, but she kind of does magic on the sly and people don't really notice that it's real magic until one day someone does notice, and that person approaches Mika and says, I have a job for you to do, please come and look after and teach these 3 orphan girls at my mansion. And initially she writes it off like this seems weird, but then she ends up going through with it, and when she rocks up at the mansion she finds out that these 3 orphan girls are in fact witches and they need some guidance because their powers are overpowering them and they don't know how to control them anymore. While Mika is performing her duties as a teacher, she's also living at the mansion. At the mansion there are obviously the 3 kids, there is an older couple, and there is a boy that they adopted as well named Jamie, and Jamie is the love interest. And I love that all of them after a period of time start to form this kind of ragtag family. Although I did find the constant mantra of witches don't gather and I should be alone that Mika would remind herself of to be quite tiring, especially when she would observe how much she's fitting in and how it's actually not a problem. But then in her mind, her mentor has kind of indoctrinated her into going, I probably shouldn't gather with other witches. So she wasn't really calling herself on it. And that's not technically miscommunication, but I don't like it when a character is deliberately telling themselves something and then acting in a different way and hoping that thing will just go away. Please acknowledge it and move on. So safe to say that fixation annoyed me a little bit, but I did enjoy the cozy home that they were all creating together. And I liked that Jamie as a love interest could be considerate and soft, and they had a great conversation in, I think, the loft or the attic that was really beautiful. But at some points too, he could just be stubborn and rude, and that really annoyed me. And then there was that deal break moment of, you know, there's a secret that needs to be revealed, and that secret almost might have been a deal breaker for me. It was a pretty big one, to be honest. And while some people might be on board with the shock value of it, I was not a super big fan, and it almost ruined the book for me, like very almost. I finished the book pretty quick after that reveal, so it was fast, it was readable, it was a 3-star and enjoyable, but again, it was just one of those cozy fantasies that I'd probably read in between something else to almost cleanse my palate so I'm ready for the next thing. It doesn't stand out to me in my memory. I had to go and Google a synopsis of this one. So while it's good, it's not my standout favorite. Now I've got 2 more books to talk about, and the second last one is one of my favorite cozy fantasies ever, and that is The Spell Shop. This one follows Kiela, and she is a librarian at the Great Library of Elysium, and her best friend is a enchanted, sentient spider plant, house plant named Kaz. But there is unrest in Elysium, and Kiela is aware of this and has started packing crates of books in order to make her escape, and soon a revolution begins. Fires are set everywhere, the library is at risk, and so Kiela and Kaz escape with as many books as they can carry, and they get out of Dodge. Hoping to avoid the revolution and avoid the fact that she has stolen a whole bunch of spell books, Kiela ends up going to the very out-of-the-way island called Caltray, which is actually where she grew up until she was 8 years old, and then her parents moved to Elysium with her. So she's revisiting her childhood home that she doesn't have too much memory of now, and she's going back to her parents' old house, cleaning it up, redoing it, and trying to survive there to wait out the revolution. Now, Kiela has always had trouble dealing with people. The fact that she was a recluse at the library kind of supported her drive of almost being in isolation with only knowledge and her friend Kaz to talk to, but now she's having to rediscover how to talk to people again because she's making this island refuge into an actual home. She also runs into her neighbor, and he was a kid at the same time she was and has a couple of memories of her. So he comes over every now and then to help work on the house, and they start to form this really sweet romance. They're both so wholesomely awkward. It is adorable. And I love that this was just a gorgeous rekindling of finding yourself, being reconnected to people and discovering your passion. And the fact that she was just so awkward made the book so endearing to me. The pace was consistent. The plot was up and down. There was tension, there was resolution, there was wholesome moments that were adorable, and it honestly just had everything. I had so much emotional investment and more people should pick it up. And now finally, I've got to my last book on this recommendations video for Cozy Fantasy, and that is Sword Heart. This book follows Hela, and she has just recently inherited an estate. Unfortunately, she's also inherited all the relatives that come with that estate, and the relatives are out to blood because they want the money and they don't want Hela. Then we've got Sarkis, who is an immortal swordsman, but one catch is that he is trapped in a sword. So one night Hela is like, I don't have anything ahead of me anymore. I'm gonna be killed anyway, so I may as well take life into my own hands. And so she's drawn the sword, she's about to do God knows what, and Sarkis is like, maybe you shouldn't do that, and so the two meet. When drawing the sword, it means that Hela is now the new owner of the sword, and the sword has to protect whoever wields it. So therefore, Hela can get away from her family. So there unfolds a complicated plot where Hela needs to fight for her life, escape her family, but also be responsible for everything that she has inherited legally, so they go off to figure that out. I was really invested in the romance of this one. The tension was so sweet between both of the characters, and I also love that Hela wasn't this like 18-year-old with stars in her eyes. She was, I think, in her early 30s. She's like, I know what I'm doing, I know who I am. She loved to weaponize her own innocence or incompetence in a way, and she would pretend to not know anything and be a bit of an airhead and then talk things through really, really rapid fire with whoever was on the receiving end. And she kind of talked them in the direction that she ended up wanting to go. So she got the outcome that she wanted by bamboozling the people that she came into contact with. And I loved seeing that. There were inquisitors, there were bandits, there were in-laws that she had to fight back against. And I had such a great time with, again, the romantic tension and the banter involved in this story. But one thing that I didn't realize when I started it is this is connected to another series, so you can read this as a standalone, which is what I did, although it doesn't resolve the immortal being drawn from a sword issue. So if you go into the story expecting a resolution for that kind of magic world building aspect, it's not going to happen, and I was kind of waiting for that throughout the entire story, so that let me down a little bit. It is one of the 7 books in the World of the White Rat series, so it's definitely not a standalone, even though I read it that way. So I would advise being aware of that before you start it, because otherwise you are going to encounter this cozy quest, these great characters, this romance that is just sublime, and then go, yeah, but what about this thing that no one's talking about? Which is what I was doing the whole time. But in terms of the pace and the plot, it kept everything fresh, it kept our characters moving, the conversation and the dialogue was very in character, and I was completely immersed. So I had a great time with this, but it was just that one plot thing that I wish I'd googled beforehand. So now you know. But those are all of the cozy fantasy books that I would recommend you give a try. The Spell Shop is definitely my number one. But thank you so much for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll chat to you in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.